as long as I can remember, my father loved birds. There's the story of he was a big golfer, started golfing from a young age, and he got a double eagle in golf one time. I forget what that is, two under par or something. And it was a big deal. And I don't know if because of that, he always kind of affiliated himself with eagles. So he semi-retired back in the late 90s, and him and my mom built sort of his dream house on Lake Murray. He helped design it, and it was on the lake. They had a dock, and even there was we called it the sunroom on the back of the house that overlooked the water. And my mom decorated it with bird wallpaper, and we later hung bird sun catchers up. Part of the reason she did that was uh, to stop the birds from crashing into the window because they see the glass and they think they don't realize it's there. And my dad built this purple martin birdhouse. So my dad built things out of wood. This was his big hobby, and it was a monstrosity. It looked like a bird penthouse. And he hung it up by the water and hoped for purple martins to come. It was something that every summer they would migrate to the lake area, and you could go watch them at either sunrise or sunset over the water. So there was just all this love of birds, bird books. At some point, it sparked a love of birds in my brother. He began birding and taking pictures of birds. And this love of birding kind of spread through the whole family. When we would go visit my parents lived at the lake, we'd go out on his boat, and he'd always look for the eagle's nest. We'd have to go, there's a secret spot, and he'd find where the eagle's nest was. There were osprey, and mostly osprey from what I remember. And it'd be up high in a tall tree, and it was a big deal to see them. So my father passed away in October, and in honor of him and his life, we gathered the weekend of what would have been his birthday, or late January. We rented a big house on Lake Murray, kind of on a different part of the lake, but not far waterways from where their house was. And me and my family, Don and our kids, my brother and his kids came out from California, my sister and my mom. We gathered, we played games of all sorts, and my brother rented a boat. Despite it being late January in South Carolina, it's cold. Uh, and we were taking different boat rides, and we went out one day on the boat, and we traveled across the water, maybe 10 minutes to the neighborhood area where my parents had lived. And we come around, they kind of were in a cove. And as we come around the cove on the boat, someone spots an eagle, a bald eagle, up in a tall pine tree just off the land from where their house was their house, but still there. And then we realized there's two eagles up in this tree. I don't think we'd ever seen bald eagles or osprey right off the dock in the house. So we just hang out there for the longest time. My sister and I both had the same thought. Hi, Dad, as we look up and see these two eagles up in the tree, and they just stayed there for as long as we did. They didn't leave. At one point, they were kind of on two different parts of the branches. One flew over to the other, and I don't know if he was frolicking with the other bird. I think my brother said it was nesting season, and she kind of pushed him away. So there was a little truffle, but then they sat next to each other, and we're looking at them. Who knows what they're looking at, and just feeling the presence of my dad right there at his old house. His love was being on the lake and the water, and it was just perfect. It was a perfect moment. Um, just sort of serene, and crossing that divide into the other realm, the spiritual world, whatever it is you believe. I believe that we're spiritual beings and that we do continue on after we leave this body. So it was a beautiful moment in remembrance of my father. Hello, this is Gina
And Don.
with Focused Healthy Family. This is podcast number 153. Today we're talking about flying back to the nest.
And before we start, I thought I'd throw out a tip. This is a tip that a friend of mine actually, uh, he actually wrote a book on it called Positive Direction. And life is not always about being positive. It's about leading your life in a direction you truly want to go. It's not about taking one big leap from where you are to where you want to be in your life. It is about small steps leading in a positive direction. And one of the things that I just add to this, one of the ways he showed me this idea, he was in a presentation with me. He uh, he showed me this a clip from a presentation he was doing, and on it he had a drive shift from a car, and it had the PRNDL. And he said, what would you, as you look at this, what would you call the positive direction in that? And I said, well, it would be drive. And he said, but what if you're trying to get out of your driveway? What would the positive direction be then? And it really kind of caught me off guard that we don't, we think of positive in one direction. We don't think about all the different um, aspects of it and where we want to go in life.
Depending on where we want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we're facing the garage door and we
We
want to
don't
get
want to
out
go
of the
through it.
driveway, if we move forward, is that going to be a positive experience?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, then the reverse would be the positive direction. What if you need to push the car because it won't start? Neutral might be your
It's
positive direction.
or if you're in deep snow, you might want to put in low. So there's all kinds of things there. But anyway,
Do you have a caregiver tip for today?
uh, no, I do not. I could give one though.
Well, you pull that up.
All right, I'll
We're
give
going
it.
to be delving into this idea of flying back to the nest. So, kind of delving into the sandwich generation a little more with juggling caring for aging loved ones and still caring for children.
Oh,
And
well, we're talking about flying back to. Birds don't necessarily do that for their kids.
no, they push them out of the nest, they learn to fly, and they're off. And yet we've kind of come to the place in our lives as humans, at least in our Western culture, that we disappear, we move away from home, we, migrate, so to speak, to other areas. And yet, some of us return to care for parents. Some of us still stay, within the vicinity of those parents, but we're busy doing our own things. And when a loved one has additional needs, especially our parents, we often come back, as in coming back to help care for them, whether it's to their house, to the city where they live, um, whatever that might look like.
All right, well, let's do a little caregiving tip from our Caregiving 101 by Mike Collins, 101 ways to keep caregiving from making you crazy, which that we know. Um, this is tip number 44. The soothing effects of bathing have been known for thousands of years.
Hmm.
Simply washing your face during a stressful time can help calm and be refreshing effect. Find a type of soap that smells wonderful and feels even better. If you're a candles, if you're a if you're a candles around the tub kind of person, treat yourself. Give yourself enough time and hopefully without interruption, take your time in the bath. So take a bath. Better yet, take a bubble bath.
Or add some Epsom salts to help release toxins and relax muscles. Oh, that's my favorite thing to do, is to take a nice soak in the tub. I don't usually do the candles thing. I remember years ago you used to set me up with a nice bath with some candles, and um, our older daughter loves soaking in the tub. She works hard with animals and physically challenging. And so she loves to do a soak. And she's gotten some different bubble bath products, some soaps with
The
wonderful
lavender
scents,
soaps, yeah, that
lavender
she loves.
scents. And thinking about calming things, it reminds me of our timeshare that we have, and they decided to make all of their toiletry products lavender scented. So there's soap and there's shampoo and everything. And much to my son's dismay, who has an allergy to lavender, when he went to the resort the last time, it's like it can be a calming, soothing smell and scent. Yet, if you're allergic to it, it's not going to be calming. Kind of like thinking about the whole positive direction idea. Is it calming and soothing to get into a tub full of lavender soap? Not if you're allergic to lavender. I remember him having to wash with conditioner or use the
Well,
sink
he was able to, they were able to pull some up there, but
eventually, but
yeah.
initially he had to use like the Dawn detergent or something to take a shower because all that there was in there was the lavender soap. So, yeah, thinking about caregiving and how important it is to care for ourselves. So, we've been talking a lot about caring for aging loved ones and looking at different resources and things to support them, and kind of delving back into the sandwich generation idea. So, this is caring for an aging parent or loved ones while still caring for a child. And I found a article from the University of Michigan. It's from Michigan Medicine .org. And there was a study done in 2022 about a sandwich generation study, kind of literally looking at these people. Now, they define it as people caring for a child under the age of 18 while also caring for an aging parent over the age of, I think they say 65 in here. And we've talked before, sometimes you may have a child older than 18, but they might still depend on you.
Sorry. This thing's, sorry.
You're being disruptive,
I'm
Donald.
sorry. It was trying anyway, this disrupting child in the parent world here or something. Ah, okay.
Um, all right. So the study talks about caring for an aging parent and having a child under the age of 18. We've talked about you might be caring for a child older than that who either depends on you financially, emotionally, physically, possibly in some way. Maybe they have mental health challenges. Maybe you're paying for their college. As we know, even when our children move out, they still rely on us in many ways. And, we do have a child under the age of 18, and we have a young 20 something who has moved back home and, has needed us when she was in a car accident and other things that have happened. And obviously, the teenager is still more of our big responsibility, and juggling that while caring for my dad over the past 5 years or more when he was in and out of the hospital for different conditions, and figuring out where I would be in her needs and his needs. Um so they talk about the nickname for, it says, mostly female middle-aged group of Americans who serve as caregivers for both older and younger family members at the same time. The study, again, this was from 2022, estimates that there are 2.5 million of these caregivers. Um, in all, nearly one quarter of adults who provide care for at least one parent over the age of 65 also care for at least one child under 18. So, one quarter, 25% of adults who are caring for a parent over 65 also have a child under the age of 18. And this was based on the University of Michigan Department of Psychiatry study. The researchers show that being in the middle of caregiving sandwich, that it's different than just caring for an aging parent. There's a different aspect to it. It says overall sandwich generation caregivers are twice as likely to report financial challenges. So 36% reported financial challenges compared to 17% of those who were only caring for an aging parent. Um, and they also report more emotional difficulty with compared to their peers who are caring for just a aging loved one and not a child. Um, they also score higher on overload. So burnout and challenges of caring for both. And it talks about what are the health policy implications for this. We need to look at these people who are in this position. They talk about, the financial challenges that, people who are on Medicaid needing assistance for their financial care and the challenges, this can put on the family when there are limited resources. I see this all the time, talking to loved family members of people who've come to rehab and now their loved one can't really go back home anymore. They need additional care. And what's the difference between making that happen and not? A big part of it is money.
Mm.
If you have enough money, you can set your loved one up in an independent living facility and pay for a 24/7 caregiver to come in and be there and support them. Now, it's not easy to do all that. It does take a lot of time, and finding a right caregiver is certainly challenging. Yet, if you don't have the financial resources to pay for that, and we're talking fees of $20 to $25 an hour, at least in our area of the country, um, you
Well,
know,
then the room, the
and
room
living
itself is
living somewhere, the cost of
three
that
to four to 6,000, and just
depending
depending on
on
where
the
you're at.
level of care. Yeah, I know people who opt to keep their loved one to continue in independent living versus moving them to assisted living at places that have both, because the cost of going to assisted living is so much higher. They'd rather pay for a one-on-one person because they don't quite get that one-on-one attention at an assisted living. Um, so we can share the link to this study. But looking at these challenges and the differences in caregiving experiences with them, um, the length of time that people spend caring for their aging loved ones. Um, Only a minority of both groups use supportive services to help with their caregiving duties. Um, so there are so many resources out there, like we share with you and like we provide for people, but the percentage of people who take the advantage of those resources, sometimes they can even offer financial assistance. There's different grants and funding out there to help pay for services like caregivers, but people don't often know about them. I worked with someone recently, and they talked about the frustration of their family, their loved one had VA benefits, and no one, the social worker never told her that they could access there was a what we call adult care, adult daycare kind of facility where you take your loved one to if they're able to move around to some extent. There's usually requirements, but often with dementia, where they can go and spend 4 hours, 6 hours of the day, and then you drop them off, you pick them up. Well, she actually got this paid for, but the social worker never told her that this was an option. So a lot of times, we don't know what the options are out there. We don't even know that sometimes these things exist, whether they're paid for or we have to provide the expense of it.
Oh,
Um,
sorry.
you
Well,
know, and go ahead.
well, just you think about it too in the same. Everybody's busy, in their life, but it's even more so when you've got children at home. You're trying to, emotional wise, and it gets to be we don't have time necessarily to look for all these different things. It's hard to um, take the time when you've got to split your time between your kids, between your aging loved one, and try to give something to yourself on top
As
of
an
it.
example, over the summer, um, we started, I guess in the spring even, we started researching facilities that provided assisted living care, particularly with a memory care unit for my father. My mother was still caring for him at home and just seeing the burden and the toll it was taking on her. So I'm in a new town, and my child decides they're done homeschooling. They want to go to the public high school. So it's like June. I had notebooks. I was also looking for more job opportunities for myself in the area I now live because I've been driving back and forth to Charlotte. So I had a notebook for all my job opportunities and I would write things down. I had a notebook for my dad and the different facilities and things we were looking at. And then after we moved him in, it involved when he went to the hospital and his other needs. And then I had a notebook figuring out my daughter's plans to going into high school, and making this decision in when the school year had ended was really a challenge, connecting with the people and finding out the options. It's sort of a small county where we live, and didn't know, what options there were for different high schools and it would take to, find out where she could go to school. We knew, we could just enroll her in the local one, but even finding those answers, I left numerous voicemails for people and never heard back. So, being in the middle of all that, here I am driving to Charlotte some to work. I work part time, yet it's a juggle. We juggle our schedule. We've done this for years, where Don works days that I don't. I mean, now that we have children that don't need us physically,
Yes, that's a big
it's a
thing.
lot easier. But even when our child was old enough, we had issues with mental health challenges that required one of us to be there. I was thinking back to when my dad was in the hospital, um, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. And we I'd have to drive 45 minutes to the hospital where he was at. Excuse me. And, you know, our child was young teens at the time, and having to navigate her needs. And, she needed me in my time, and my dad and my mom needed me. And, I couldn't be in both places at once. The time I'd spent going back and forth driving, I have a memory of going to the hospital, taking my child with me, and it can be overwhelming to be in a room with a grandparent and they're hooked up to machines, or they're, have a catheter or things that they don't want to think about or look at. And I remember her she was doing some classes locally and had the work to work on, and sat in the lobby area. Luckily, she was mature enough that she could sit there and work on that work. I could check back on her while I helped care for my dad. Thinking even further back, my mother had a hip replacement. This was many years ago. And my grandfather had passed, and my mom had just had her hip surgery. She couldn't fly to go. She kind of still needed a little bit of support around the house as she recovered. And my dad flew back to New Jersey to the funeral. And I went down. This is when they lived at the lake with my, gosh, she was not even one at the time. My baby in tow. She was probably 8, 9 months.
Oh, wow.
And because our youngest learned to walk before 10 months of age. And I remember Grammy was walking around pushing her walker, and my little one had the little kitty walker, and they're both walking together. And, juggling that even at that time period, um, when my dad was still healthy and enough to, travel on his own. And, there was a time when we had a kid in the hospital and
Oh,
over
yeah.
several months, and my dad was in and out of the hospital. And somehow I, for the most part, they did not coincide at the same time, but I had this, you get visitor badges when you go into the different hospitals, and I had a collection of them from like two or three different places. Just the time that I spent going back and forth and caring for a child in the hospital, whatever age they are, and for whatever reason they're there, whether, it's mental health issues, which can be even more challenging because you have so many
Oh,
restrictions about being there with them, and just the emotional toll and,
mm.
the physical toll. I go and I, spend the day at the hospital, and I come home, I don't necessarily have the energy and the attention to give my children that I might otherwise want to. um, just kind of that exhausting impact, and, being in that position to have to make those choices. I was fortunate. Don, I knew he was there with the kids and supporting them in the ways they needed, yet um,
Well, it's to say, when we throughout our life, we've done this where we've split off, where one person's here and the other person's working or whatever, and that on the logical side of that, that sounds great and all, but there's still this side of, I'm not there when my child is doing this or that. For either one of us, I mean, you more than me, you were doing more work than I was at the time, or throughout our life, actually.
Well, yeah,
But
it varied at different times in our lives.
works on
So
your.
even without caring for our parents at the time, just that juggling act,
Mhm.
most of our time together was spent discussing the kids and
Yeah,
like handoff, like, okay, this is what's been happening, okay, now I'm going into work, this is what you need to do, and just juggling that
I didn't even get a
responsibility.
shower.
Um,
uh,
and so, yeah, so you add in, and it's a similar, excuse me, kind of situation, a similar situation when your time is, juggled between, because once we moved my dad up here, we were taking turns. If I was working in Charlotte, you went to spend some time with my dad, and when you were off working in Charlotte, I'd be visiting my dad.
well, and then we had to go. Then we had to, and not as much time, but we had to go down and help your mom, getting ready for move.
Yeah. And while this was happening, she's moving. And yeah, because she's an hour and a half away, she's in her 80s. She can't easily get up. My dad was, oh my goodness, he lived at that facility 4 months barely. And he was admitted to the hospital at least twice and in the emergency room a couple times. And, just knowing my dad's got dementia and the confusion and, being there without somebody with him, certainly it made it easier on us when we moved him close to us. Um,
Yeah.
it made a big difference. It kind of all worked out beautifully. I think we've described this before. We live in the smaller town and you can be almost anywhere in 15 minutes or less. And so his facility was close, the hospital was close. So being able to juggle that made that a lot easier. And yet it still takes a toll.
Well,
It still takes time and energy, resources. When I was at the hospital with my dad, I wasn't working.
yeah.
I remember one time my dad was in the hospital. I think this was the weekend we were supposed to move him into the assisted living facility up in Salisbury from Sun City, so an hour and a half up there. He wound up, I had spent the night at my parents to help move the next day. He had a TIA, kind of a mini stroke. So instead of moving that morning, he went to the hospital. And to get to the right
That's
hospital
true.
with the stroke recovery, it was in the opposite direction from where we live. If you're in the Charlotte area, it was the Pineville Hospital. So mom's half an hour south. We're southwest at this hospital. We live
An
an
hour and
hour
a
and a
half.
half from there.
Yeah.
So instead, I'm at that hospital. I'm supposed to work that weekend. Um, he spends a good 4 or 5 days there. We were moving him in on a Tuesday because I said it was ideal to move in at the beginning of the week and not the weekend because there's less staff and less things going on. Well, what wind up happening? He was in the hospital till Friday and we wound up moving him. Excuse me. But one time he was in the hospital, I remember I told work that I would come in and work for a few hours and I realized, it was still a good 25-minute drive from the hospital to where I worked. The exhaustion of trying to do that and if, feeling like I needed to be here and there and do all of this. And I remember I told her I was going to come in for a couple hours in the afternoon and my sister had come down to visit and I really just wanted to hang out with my mom and my sister and enjoy lunch together. And I had to call my boss and say, "Hey, you know what? This is exhausting, and there was guilt in telling them, I couldn't even come into work for those couple of hours that I wanted to just spend time with my mom and sister instead. But the and that was sort of caring for myself at that moment. It was very much what I needed. I spent all this time with my dad, helping my mom juggle things with the hospital, and I wanted a little break. I remember my sister there was a time she had planned to come visit my dad. He wasn't supposed to be in the hospital, but he was, and wasn't as much she could do. But her being there was helpful to me. It was helpful to have someone to talk to about things, to have someone else to just have conversations with about the family and other things going on. We don't always think of those kinds of small things as ways we can care for ourselves. And so those decisions that need to be made. But, when I chose not to work, that puts a financial burden.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, we've had that financial thing. it goes a long way for us. So, we've had a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles that because we've always our philosophy's always been to have somebody home with the children and not be gone all the time. And I before we got this goes way back, but before we got married, I was traveling a lot, going to, and we didn't want to do that, and we made that decision, which I wouldn't change it,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it caused a lot of financial issues for us
Later
to
on, when you began to have health challenges, when you wound up in the
yeah,
hospital, we were really managing it pretty well. But when all of a sudden I couldn't work
yeah.
and I had reduced my hours at work where I no longer had benefits and paid time off, I only got paid when I was the hours I was working, and then I was in a car accident and, yeah, we filed, a suit and got money back 9 months later for lost wages. Yet um, yeah, we're fortunate that my parents had done quite a bit of savings. My dad had set them up when he became a financial planner, that they didn't have financial challenges and needs. Um, and for many, that's not the case. So many people, Social Security is not enough. And if they have enough Social Security coming in, it's too much to qualify for Medicaid.
Mm.
And so they're caught in this middle space of not quite having enough money to pay for extra services they might need, sometimes barely having enough to support themselves and pay for their own bills. Even if they live in a house that's paid off, there's still taxes on
Upkeep, all of that.
the
There's a
home
lot
and
of
the
that. Yeah.
upkeep. That's part of the reason my mom was, sold that house. She loved that house, but it was a large home and it was a lot to care for. And moving out to a community where she had people around her. She lives in what's called a continuous care retirement community. She's in an independent living apartment, but that's quite a downsize going from this big 25, 3,000 square foot home to a two-bedroom apartment, and just big choices and changes to make. So even though, physically she can take care of herself, mentally she can take care of herself, supporting her with that. And I wouldn't change it. I've heard people talk about that term, oh, you feel sandwiched, you feel stuck. It's more a matter of just where we're at, and yes, it is putting a little pressure in some ways. And yet, um, if you're involved in your family, if you're part of your extended family and you want to help them, it's something we choose to do, but it's also something that feels good. It felt good to be there with my dad, um, I recently came across a picture, and I think it was one of the last times my dad was really awake and alert when I visit him, and we went on the porch. And it was one of these, your phone puts together conglomerations of pictures and shows them as a video. And I couldn't go back and find the picture, and I'm still trying to search for it. But it was a beautiful memory of time I spent with him, and we were out on the porch and we're listening to music, and he's standing up from his wheelchair, and he passed a week later. So yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, having kids is a challenge, right? Life throws different challenges at us, but the minute you bring other dependents into your life and caring for them, um, their needs kind of take priority oftentimes, and when they're dependent on us. And so the same thing happens if you have an aging parent and you're needing to step in. You're seeing that they're not able to care for themselves, or something outright happens, that they're in the hospital, they fall, they break a hip, they have some other kind of health issue.
Well, and I think it goes just a little bit of balance that
Excuse
has
me.
to come in there as far as um, one is being able to balance your life and what's going on around you, and because you still it, it still comes to an end that if you're a giving person, you give and give and give and give and give and give. There's a certain point where you can't give anymore. So it has to be kind of a balance in there. I know it's tough when you got an aging parent and they're doing things and falling or whatever, but there still has to be a balance for you. And it may mean, if you can, being able to find somebody to take over some of the things. And if you can't pay, if you may not be able to pay for it, you may want to check with a local church.
Hmm.
Uh, and see if they have volunteer programs. I know our neighbor used to have volunteers come over and do things for her. So making sure to have somebody, even if it's just somebody to come for an hour, to spend a little time for yourself or to go out or to do things, I think that's very important.
Reaching out to friends, even if it's, they'd come to the house and make dinner for your kids. I know when you were in the hospital, my friends were great. We don't even live really close anymore, still drivable, and they brought food up and meals because they knew I was juggling when my dad passed and just caring for him and meeting those needs and the responsibilities of the funeral planning after someone passes. There's
Mm,
a lot things that have to happen, things that have to get done, and having other people who can support in some way. Um, can someone go visit your loved one who's maybe in the hospital? Just popping in for a visit. Who else can step in? We need to allow kind of respite time. I've heard many times when I'm working with a patient in a rehab facility and they're like, where's, my husband, where's your dad at? Why isn't he here with me? It's like, well, he's resting right now. Mom, I'm stepping here. He'll be here later, and having them to say that because you can become really dependent on that person always being there. My dad was known for calling out Ellen or Gina. He was used to one of us always being with him and it was taxing.
mhm,
And, you feel responsible, not only being a caregiver being put into the position, but if you have that personality, some of us are more just stepped up to that situation. It's kind of part of our essence of who we are. But also if you're a people pleaser, and maybe it goes hand in hand
mhm,
with being, I know I've had many conversations, especially several years back when our one child was living on her own for the first time and putting her needs first. And I think she got called selfish by some people in her work world because she was doing that. And I'm like, if you don't learn that from a young age, you're going to be giving and exhaust yourself. That yes, you do need to be a little selfish. You need to be like, these are my needs and this is what I need. How can we help to meet them? Maybe they can't, but we have to know how to ask for it. We have to know how to ask for that help. And it's something I think I learned over time, when I was in my early 20s. Um, I didn't necessarily know how to do that. And so we want to support our loved ones wherever they're at in their journey and whatever that looks like. And so, what challenges, I asked that do you have as far as caring for maybe your children are even still where they are young enough that need someone right there with you, right? That need someone to be with them at all time, or whether you have to take them to school, pick them up. I mean, our child's now in high school yet because she's not going to her assigned school, we have to provide the transportation. And
mhm,
so
right.
that's a new juggling act of, oh, yeah, I can work in Charlotte, but if I've got to be back at 3:30 to pick a kid
Yeah.
up from school, um, and so, we're still building support systems. We don't really know many people up here in the area where we live now. And so, yes, finding people who can help you connect with resources. Maybe a retired nurse, maybe a neighbor or a friend has done similar things. And it can be a challenge to stop and ask for that help. Maybe you have kids who can help research for you. You have grown children. What things can they do?
Well, and always be well, listen to those that tell you that, well, if you need anything, let me know. Well, use that. A lot of people don't like to use that, or are they if they can't say it in total respect of you, that's their problem. You know,
And
uh,
you can make a list of those needs. And so if someone really offers that, you can send them a message with the list. You can say, hey, and maybe someone likes doing something and you don't even realize it. Oh, well, I'll come take care of your yard or, and saying, okay, these are my different needs. Are there people who can help in any way and putting it out there? And I mean, it took you having a heart attack back when we had young kids for me to step into that and ask for help. And there are times in our
and we
life,
got a lot of it too.
there's times in our life when it's easier, when you have young kids and your husband has a massive heart attack and is hospitalized, friends can step up more easily than when other things are going on. I
Yeah.
know, um, people were providing meals and things right when my father passed. But then, like 2 weeks later, I remember just feeling kind of lost and alone. And then all those people kind of went away. And,
Hmm.
where was that support and help? And so, we can think about this as we're helping other family members. Maybe you're the family member who lives far away, but you have a loved one that lives close. What can you do for them? Even if you can't necessarily help out, maybe you have a contentious relationship with your parent or you're not even speaking to them, or there's extra challenges there, but maybe you can support those other people who are, or their kids or whatever. So kind of thinking outside the box a little bit and know that you can reach out to Don and I. Whether we connect you with resources, work with you one-on-one, Don, do some tapping sessions with Don. When are you doing your next monthly group
That's coming
tapping
up
online, Don?
February 28th, so we got a week or so from now.
And how do
At
people
7 p.m. And what I would ask there is that they register so that we can, because I do these on a monthly basis, I can send you out. I don't use it as a newsletter thing. I just send it out what the events are, and I'm kind of thinking about increasing it a little bit. Um,
frequency?
yeah, but anyway, well, that's our podcast for today, and we hope you enjoyed it. We would love to hear from you. Make sure to leave us a comment or give us a like or a subscribe wherever you might be listening to our podcast. If you like what you heard today, we are here to guide you through what your journey caring for an aging loved one, caring for your kids. That's what we're here for. Gina answers questions on Ask the OT, which we hope to get that back in line pretty soon here. Um, and we have a plan that helps you through this different things with the work I do and what Gina does. You can find it all out by going to our website at www.focusedhealthyfamily.com. You can find us on Facebook at Focused Healthy Family One, Focused Healthy Family, Instagram on Focused Healthy Family One, and YouTube at Focused Healthy Family. And join us each Thursday when we put this podcast out. And you can find it on focusedhealthyfamilypodcast.com.
And be sure to share, this podcast with someone whether it's a link to the audio version or to the YouTube page, or um, letting other people know out there that might benefit from this information and support, and check out our other podcasts. We've interviewed numerous different people. And again, if the caregiving side of children, we have quite a bit that from the first year of our podcast covering kind of more that aspect of things. But
So remember, how you speak to your children or your loved ones today shapes their future and yours.